Hello and welcome. If you ask most people to tell you something about the Chinese automotive market, one of the first things they'll probably say is that Chinese buyers love long wheelbase versions of luxury vehicles. This has resulted in some very strange creations, including things like a long wheelbase version of the BMW X1. Well, it's time to add another name to that list with this. This is not an Audi A6. This is also not an Audi A8. This is an Audi A7L. That's right, Audi has ditched the sloped back roof of the A7, added some wheelbase, and now they're selling it here in China. Is it a huge mistake or a stroke of genius? Let's find out.
With hands-on test drives and reviews of exciting Chinese market vehicles, Wheelsboy is the #1 source for China auto insights. Be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook.
The exterior styling of the A7L differs very little from the standard A7, except for a slightly reworked grille. That is, of course, till you get here to the rear end. Gone is the signature sloped back A7 rear end in favor of this, well, trunk. It's slightly disconcerting at first glance, and this car was met with a healthy amount of skepticism when it debuted at the 2021 Shanghai Auto Show.
The trick is to stop thinking of this as a variation of the A7 and start thinking of it as a completely new model. I have a feeling that Audi would have loved to give it a different name, but they've kind of worked themselves into a corner at this point. A1 through 8 are already taken, and they can't call it an A9 as that would put it above the flagship A8 in their lineup. So I guess they had to go with A7L, even if that kind of doesn't make sense.
While the extra 10 centimeters, around 4 inches of wheelbase, means that occupants have more space, the loss of the liftback means that cargo, well, it has less space. This trunk offers 384 liters of space versus the 535 of the standard A7 liftback.
The interior styling of the A7L is even more indistinguishable from the regular A7, the only difference being a bit of extra space in the back seat, but we'll get to that in a moment.
But first, let's talk about standard equipment. It's been a while since I drove a German luxury vehicle, and I'm pretty sure we've never actually reviewed one on this channel. I'm used to driving Chinese cars, and those cars have an incredible amount of equipment as standard. This car, however, which is priced from $72,000 to $123,000, well, it has a lot of stuff that is not. If you pick a $72,000 entry-level model, you really don't get very much. You don't get a wireless charging pad. You don't get a adaptive cruise control. You don't get cooled or massaging seats. In order to get those options, you either have to select them and pay more, or you have to get one of the highest trim level cars that cost in excess of $100,000. I'm not really seeing a lot of value there. That extra wheelbase does result in better leg room for rear occupants, and the new roofline does mean you have a decent amount of headroom. Better than their standard A7, but still not particularly great if I'm being honest. Adjustable seats, well, you guessed it, they're optional.
The A7L can be equipped with a familiar array of engines, namely a low output and high output version of the turbocharged 2-liter or the turbocharged 3-liter V6 that we have in this car. That engine makes 250 kilowatts and 500 newton meters of torque, aka 340 horsepower and 370 pound-feet. All of them are partnered with a 7-speed DCT.
That 500 newton meters of torque is available from just 1,370 RPM, which goes a long way to explaining why this thing feels like an absolute freight train on the highway, much like a standard A7 would. It does technically have a 0.3 second slower 0 to 100 km/h time, but you're hardly going to notice. This thing, however, does drive essentially like a softer version of an A7 that I'm sure is explained mostly by the added wheelbase. All 3-liter turbo versions of this car come with the air suspension, which means it's adjustable for both height and firmness. While the A7L does feel softer in all of its suspension settings compared to a standard A7, that doesn't mean there's no driving pleasure to be found. In addition to that impressive acceleration that I mentioned before, you also have very direct steering, and you even get a little bit of road feel communicated through the steering wheel and the seat of the pants. These cars also come with Audi's DAWS, I believe it's called, rear wheel steer system, which means greater stability at high speeds and a much smaller turning circle, something that really comes in handy with this long wheelbase car.
The rear seats are still very comfortable once you're on the move, though I'm not sure it's quite as comfortable as the backseat of an A6L. And there is a more noticeable amount of tire noise back there thanks to the 21-inch wheels on our car.
Put simply, I think the best way to describe the A7 is it's basically got more space than an A6, but it drives better than an A8. That's a pretty good area to be in. One of the many reasons that Chinese buyers love long wheelbase versions of luxury vehicles is that they're often locally produced. That means they offer a great value compared to some of the imported models. The A7L is produced locally, but I'm not really sure I see the value proposition in it. Therefore, I don't expect sales to be very high. But hey, maybe I'm completely wrong and customers will fall in love with it. Only time will tell. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Links in the description. And as always, like, subscribe, and hit the bell.